Good morning. Short video to make sure that I record this as I can, because I'm moving forward, won't be able to bring this time back. So what do I have here? What am I doing? I'm building the lightest and the best cyclocross flat bar bicycle that I possibly can with the ingredients that I have. So that's just by choosing all the best parts for this particular build, keeping an eye on functionality, weight, and so on. So this is the frame that I have chosen for the following reasons. It's fairly light. It's, as far as I remember, about 2,000 grams. There's nothing on it, obviously, right now, absolutely nothing. Not even a hanger for the rear mech. Not even bosses for the V-brakes. These are in here to prevent the threads from clogging with paint. So what have I done to this frame? I have 1, 2, 3 times. I think I have what do you call it? I used paint stripper to get the old paint off. We use the modern paint strippers that are legal in places like Germany. The quality, the power of the paint stripper is rather weak, so that's why I had to do it 4 times, three or 4 times. Then I sanded, I brushed this area here where there is now primer on it. This was finally sanded after all of the old residue of the paint, absolutely all of it is gone. I sanded it with 320, that's all, making sure that I'm focusing on the shape that I'm sanding. So this is round. I used flat. I used tools like these. I'll show you. This was barely used. That's just for the flat surface. This is a hard rubber sanding block. Then I have another sanding block which has two two parts. This one's rather soft, this one's rather hard, so I mainly use the hard one. That just gives you a little bit of flexibility when you're making round tubes, sanding round tubes, in order not to sand any flats in it. So this is what happens if you sand a tube. Yes, this is good when something is exposed, you got a little piece of paint sticking out. You don't want to sand in a dent, so you use a hard block just for that, but sympathetically with the shape obviously is this. So that's the semi-hard one that I use the most. So that ensures that I get good highlights. I made sure all the little details here are, these were a little bit rusty, these bosses for the bottles. Thankfully there's 2. So I, with mind of the shape, sanded this, so I have a very good preparation. What you see here with the primer is just the leftover. It was about 200 grams of primer that I still had in a can that I wanted to empty out, and I more or less barely covered everything. There's some areas where I didn't cover, like here or down here. So, but that doesn't matter as long as I'm not needing to go on the pure aluminium with the continuing process. So the next thing I will do, I will paint matte white. I'm going to get a good covering of matte white on the whole area that is now seen in primer. The reason being, I'm going with white because I didn't have white primer, so that would have been better, but hey ho. So I got the separation of the aluminium and the paint via the primer, and then I will use white matte, which is basically just facilitating me to get really nice vibrancy in the paint. So that's what I'll do next. I will just barely sand this with 800 grit, just to make sure that there's no exposed pieces of dirt inside the paint that would give me a bad highlight afterwards. So just for that, just barely touching it once. There is only 2 mistakes that I have, and let me come a little bit closer to you. So I wasn't very careful, obviously, on this area. So I must have touched something. Focus. Try not to knock over that paint over there. Why are you not focusing? Come on, let's try this like so. Yeah. Focus on this, please. You see there's a tiny little problem, so I will make sure that this is sanded flat. There is also a problem where the bike, where the frame was standing on, with see my wet paint down here at the bottom bracket housing. Same thing. The rest is more or less on perfect. So that's obviously next action. Go for matte white. And I will paint this with some kind of effect paint. I'm going to shop at Mr. DIY. Mr. DIY has one most recent super cool thing that I absolutely love, and that is basically a tinted product line, tinted clear coat. So you get it with blue, you get it with red. I can't remember whether there was green, so obviously that's the 2 that I want. I want the red clear coat and I want the green clear coat, because I'm using basically a frog green metallic for this area here, and I'm using a kind of a purplish pink red for the front. And I'm using a little bit of white, where on a classic vintage frame you would have a little window to give a little bit of a pedestal for the company's logo. So let's focus a little bit on the rear half of the frame. What I like about this frame, this is future proof for me. This can do absolutely everything I would ever want to do with any bike. First of all, massive clearance. I'm going to start off with a 33mm Cyclocross tire, so that's fine. That's going to look rather lost in here, but this would go probably to about a 50mm 28-inch or 29er, no problem. We'll figure that out at a later point in time. So clearance, one issue. Secondly, I can use V-brakes, which is the lightest braking options and the best performance. There is also facilitation for a disc brake. Shall I ever need to use a disc brake? I'm not going to do that in the beginning. There is a bolted on fallout end Milchhänger. So very good. It's no horizontal, so this does not lend itself to single speeding, but that's not the plan here. So there you go. This is an aluminium frame, and there's a dude out there in YouTube that totally says that the material of your frame has the least to do with how a bicycle rides. It's all in the other components that give you anything else, like some aluminium frames are known to be harsh when ridden, and there's a lot of text out there from the likes of Zach Gallardo, for example, who waxes lyrical about his NJS frame, how he's planing and this and that. So there's the antidote. Some dude, forgot his name, lives somewhere in a cool little forest in America, I think, or Canada, and romance, something romance. I apologize for being so bad in remembering names. He has a relatively recent video where he says frame material has mostly nothing to do with how comfortable a bike rides. So I'm gonna test this theory because parallel to this, I'm actually going to build a rather similar bike which is focused on city riding, similar in the amount of tire that I'm using and similar in the setup that I'm building, focusing on the weight, but that's obviously a vintage Italian steel lugged frame from the 80s of the super best. Is a really nice quality tubing being used here, whereas this could be pretty much described as a no-name material here, probably some of the cheapest aluminium there is. So this is no planing qualities, this has no butted, it's non-butted as far as I'm concerned. So this theoretically is the lower spec of frame qualities, yet it's not heavy. You know, you pick it up, you think it's heavy, nope. It's definitely lighter than any steel frame by about a third on average, and this can do a whole lot more. The one thing that I didn't mention is that this is a 1 1/8 inch fork that I can use here. So this is a modern standard, so when it comes to steering and the precision that comes through your fork by riding the bike, so that actually is one thing that I really want. I want a strong headset, a strong headset tube. Is that right? Steer tube. So in order to get all the noodly nonsense out of it, and we're going to use a very good quality brand new headset in order to eliminate any wobble, any imprecision that often comes with vintage bicycles. My daily shopper bicycle has a 1 inch non-threaded setup, and it just continuously works itself loose and is a bit of a nuisance. Sorry, this is actually a threaded 1 inch steel fork. Not impressed with that. Anyway, so that's probably the most important part for me by choosing this frame. 1 1/8 inch bigger diameter lets me use a more modern carbon, how shall I name this? I'm going to use a suspension delete fork because I want it to come up. So yeah, 1 1/8 inch bigger diameter, absolute standard, lots and lots of things available. So number 1, 2 bottle cages, enough cables for shifting and braking, mounts for racks galore, 2 systems for braking, replaceable hanger, and weight. So what I'm going to do is the aluminium, and I've already done the hardest part. I brushed all the welds where the basically usually the paint sits in, and I figured that actually one of the most efficient tools before you do the polishing and the sanding is this kind of brush. Very thin bristles, very soft, not steel, it's something else. Or it is thin spring steel that is coated in brass, who knows. So for brushing welds and paint stuck in the welds, doing something like this is really amazing. Gives you eventually a massively good shine for the mad topography that these wheels have. This didn't prevent me from having to really use my favorite tool, and that is my old kitchen knife. When it really sits in the corner, then you need to get to this. Okay, what I haven't done yet is give some more nice quality shape to these flat surfaces here. That I will still do. What I have done is go around it once with 600 wet and dry sandpaper, so that will be continuously polished on my next location. So the only thing that I'm going to do on this bike at this point in time in this location is paint, and then I let it dry, and I will make sure I put the brake axes back in here so they do not get lost. And maybe before I paint the white, I go on the next level of sandpaper grade, which is 800. So I will sand this in my usual tried and tested successful method, is to sand with, okay, here's paint 320, here it was 400, and then 600, so I go 800, 1000, 1200, 1500, 2000, 2500, 3000, and then I have a even more flexible 3000 pad sandpaper, and that sort of like makes the surface better. And then it'll be polished partially with the machine rotating in the angle grinder. Yep, so that will be the frame. So when I say that I'm building the best bike possible at the lightest position as in final weight, I will need to make the addition to the centers within my means. So that's all the things that I have kicking around. Interestingly enough, I found that not always what seems to be the most obvious when it comes to weight it really takes the effort of measuring. It needs to be weighed. All the alternatives in plural need to be weighed, and you need to look at each individual item. So for example, rear wheel. You want to think about your hub, your spokes, your rim band, your tube, your tire, and your cassette. And each of these elements surprisingly differ in weight. So even if you think you have like 5 mediocre choices, there will be one that sticks out with the best weight. What obviously really helps is not to overcomplicate things. You do not need more tech than what you need for your application. I'm talking about brakes now. I'm adamant that the only brake that I want to bolt onto a situation like that is a V-brake. I do not like any inferior brakes. The center pull brakes, where you pull a cable in the center that needs another linkage, which is basically pre-V brake. I really think they're that much inferior and so fiddly to set up. This is no point. Sorry, that's my opinion. So I go for V brakes, Shimano only, and I harbor a big collection of the old Shimano LX that has a slightly parallel. No, sorry, pardon me. That, to put it simply, a V-brake, a regular V-brake, just angles around an axis. And if you think about your brake pad, by the time it should hit the brake, your brake pad should be parallel to the rim. If it's slightly off, you have a little point only, and then when it closes in, you get all the full flat surface. If you can manage to do that, okay. But there used to be the LX brake arms, which had a parallel linkage, which enabled the brake pad at all times to be parallel to the rim. Magura did the same thing with their hydraulic brakes, but my dear God, hydraulic brakes, fiddling cables, leakage, bubbles, bleeding, no, not for me. So I'm using cable brakes, I'm using V brakes. Okay, so that's for weight, and it continues. Okay, probably the only thing that I actively usually go out to buy is a carbon seat post, because it's reasonably priced, it adds comfort, and it's super duper light. What I also do buy is a standard handlebars, so I'm using a flat bar, carbon, China, 760 millimeters wide, which weighs about 40% less than the next aluminium option, and that's money well spent. So we're talking about $20, 20 pounds, 20 euros, 25 euros on the seat post, and similar on the handlebars. I'm using a very short stem, again for weight, again for cost. There's a wake item that used to be cost next to nothing from China. I have a couple of those. There's a little bit of rise in a centimeter or so. And in order for you not to need too much rise in your bars, but still bring the bike up in the front, so you... Okay. How do I finish this sentence? I like to... And now the frame is in the way, isn't it? You see me. I like to have a fairly upright position so I can see well. That has to do with that usually all my riding ends up at least off the road, at least in gravel. I go on Mount Bukitima with this bike eventually, just because it's hot, it's humid, it's a massive incline in there, and weight matters. So I'm not going there with a full suspension bicycle. Yes, that would be nice on the decline, but first of all you need to get up. So therefore this is kind of like a bike that I will be able to use there. Maybe not my designated Bukitima bike. I have another one that's much better, more tire. At least we got a 2.0 tire on there. Here we only will have 35, 37, 33 millimeters of tire. We shall see. That's a weight consideration. So the height to bring up the handlebars for me is not in the rise of the bar, it's not in the rise of the stem, it's in the length of the fork. I'll achieve that by buying a modern suspension delete mountain bike rigid carbon fork. That again costs you about $80 shipped from China, and if you be careful by whom you buy, and you look out for other people that have bought there before and have reported on the quality of the item, then it should be good. And they've been doing that for a while. So minus the charlatans that still try to fob you off with some rubbish that breaks because it's made out of carbon marzipan. Yeah. Okay. That describes this build. This will now be sanded, painted white, packed, let it dry, put the brake axle in, prepare for shipping. So that concludes this build for now, but this is a future one. So as soon as I'm in Singapore, that will be one of the first things that I want to deal with. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe. Take care. Have a nice day.